Good evening and welcome to Revolution Evolution. I am your host, Gregory of Revolution Evolution. I am being joined tonight by Dee with Around the World with Dee and Friends, who I am a frequent guest on her show. And I'm also being joined by Joe Firestone of Joe Firestone Empowering Democracy, where we talk about a range of topics from the Ukraine conflict, dumping the corruption, and many, many other important topics. So if y'all want to, y'all can go and check them out. Subscribe to D at Around the World with D and Friends and Joe at Joe Firestone Empowering Democracy. And tonight I am going to be covering some issues out of the Philippines regarding the issues facing the migrant workers from the Philippines who travel thousands of miles to Middle Eastern countries, and they get so brutally mistreated that it's unreal how mistreated they get on a regular basis. The abuse, which is grotesque, which ranges from physical abuse, sexual assault, verbal and mental abuse, and there's a whole host of abuse that goes on. In many cases, the migrant workers are usually murdered because the abuse gets so horrible that in 2018, there was a Filipina in Kuwait which was brutally murdered, stuffed in a freezer. Now, in tonight's show, I'm going to cover another instance of another Filipina who was murdered and left for dead, abandoned in a desert in Kuwait.
Gee.
And it's just so egregious. It's so appalling to see how many human rights abuses there really are in the world. So much that should not be going on at all. And this brings me to the first article, which is a really short article that I did find. And it's a really great article. And this one here is from Kapuso, which in Tagalog, Kapuso means GMA Network, where this article is about from the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, where 140 distressed OFWs just last month were repatriated from Kuwait. A total of 140 distressed overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, were repatriated from Kuwait on Friday, September 15th, according to the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or in short, AWA. This is part of the repatriation program of AWA and the Department of Migrant Workers to help those in need of repatriation back home safely. And they have a really good airport team that does work. And I do know that back during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the cases were so rampant, they had to split the burden between the airports at Clark, which is in Angeles City. They had to also do another location in Ninoy Aquino International, as well as Cebu Airport and Davao City Airport. And they were also assisted with food, hotel accommodations, and transport to their provinces and all that, which is normal for the protocol for migrant workers coming from any of the Middle Eastern countries. That's normal protocol. I do know that when OFWs are repatriated, they are going through the strenuous deportation process from the country that they were working in. And I've witnessed firsthand and seen how that works firsthand. I'm not going to say how, and I'm not going to name names out of the protection of the Filipina and the other Filipinas I have corresponded with for a year in my investigation. And Deacon tell y'all, I ranted and raved for like 2 years on Twitter, calling out so many government organizations in the Philippines for not doing more.
So, Greg, why do workers from the Philippines have to go over to the Middle East to work?
That's a good question. And the reason why is because wages are so low in the Philippines, where the average wage, I think, is 13,000 to 15,000 pesos, which is roughly between 250 to probably 300 US dollars a month. But they go to places in the Middle East where they make on average between 21,000 pesos on upward to 26,000 pesos. So it's higher wages.
But why are the wages in the Philippines so low?
Because of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism runs so rampant, and there's rampant corruption where the Philippine government is totally owned just like ours is.
So the Marcos family is back in control of the Philippines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are they changing anything?
Very little.
So they're practicing basically neoliberalism over there.
Yeah, and it's been running rampant ever since. The market.
Further question: do they owe money but to the IMF or the World Bank?
I'm not entirely sure, but I can do the research on that and do a follow-up show on that. But the average wage, which is something I've just looked up, it is 161,847.6 pesos per year. So roughly a little over $3,200 per year. That is the average wage in the Philippines.
Okay, it's really interesting. Of course, the Philippines does issue its own currency.
Yeah, they are a currency issuing government. They have a sovereign free floating fiat currency just like we do, which is the Philippine peso. So why they can't afford to pay workers more or have a job guarantee which pays a living wage, which the average apartment over there, which is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment, bare bones goes for 12 to 15,000 pesos, which is between 250 to 300 US dollars. That's not including utilities and other costs.
Okay, so that's the per month rent?
Yes.
Phew.
And I've did that research by looking it all up. The Philippines is a developing country. It's a third world country. And I've been doing research on the Philippines for 6 years now. Like, the people there are very great. They're very nice and humble people.
Yes, I know. I've had a family doctor here in the United States.
Yeah, they have like multiple U.S. military bases there as well. I think there's like 4 or 5 U.S. military bases in the Philippines. One being at Subic Bay, which is around the Olongapo area.
Yeah. We had a family doctor for many years, for 20 years, in fact, or 21 years. Okay, who was from the Philippines.
Yeah, the Filipino people are very humble, very sweet, kind heart. They are some of the most hardworking people that I have met. Like, and they do an honest living. There's a lot of them that work as housekeepers for a lot of the people that are in their area.
Yeah.
You know,
Like,
the
I'm friends
military.
with
He was
many
a
of them.
very fine family doctor. He worked for Kaiser Permanente. Okay, and he retired and went back to the Philippines. He's there now.
You know, when I was in the Coast Guard, there was when I first joined, and I wondered why there were so many people that were cooks, you know, were from the Philippines, you know, the Filipino Americans, and at the Coast Guard and a lot of the military, there was always prejudice, and at one time that was the only field they could be in was to be a cook. Now that's changed, and at one time, even like females could only be like a storekeeper and health services or a yeoman, and that's changed. So they had it, but like I said, the people from the Philippines, that's why there were so many cooks, because that was the only field they could be in at the time.
I was talking not long ago with Fadl Kaboub, and we were discussing issues surrounding the global South. And he and I were discussing that about how the Filipino economy actually is. And a lot of that spawns, like, one of their major exports is labor. Like, they are a major exporter of labor.
Right, but they're an exporter of labor because they don't have a job guarantee.
No, they do not.
If they had a job guarantee, okay, at a living wage, socially inclusive, I'm sure people would stay home and do that job.
Like, I have a really good article that correlates to that, and I'm going to go into it. And this is also something that's highlighted as well into tonight's show. And this article comes from the BBC, and this is an article from March of 2015, where it goes over the country training people to leave, which is really sad. The Philippines has one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, but there aren't enough jobs to go around. So every year, the government teaches thousands of people the skills that they need to get jobs abroad. When I arrive at a state run housemaids academy in Manila, morning exercises are well underway. A squad of uniformed cleaners is poking feather dusters into all corners of the sitting room. In the kitchen, trainee cooks are immersed in the finer points of salad preparation. The academy has the feel of a soap opera set, each room meticulously dressed to ape the reality of a grand residence. Below stairs is a classroom filled with old-fashioned school desks. Here, I'm told the trainee house servants take lessons in hygiene, respect, and personal finance. The Philippine government schools tens of thousands of maids, chauffeurs, mechanics, and gardeners every year with the express purpose of launching them into long-term service abroad. For the state, it's a win-win. The economic exiles, there are currently some 10 million of them, send back foreign currency, which is the lifeblood of the Filipino economy, and the extraordinary exodus of labor acts as a safety value in a country struggling to provide homegrown jobs for a population rising by more than 2 million per year. We are
How large is the population of the Philippines? About 100 million?
The current population right now, as of last year's figures, was around 111 or 112 million.
Mm.
And they are a very small country.
They're a very small country geographically, but not population-wise.
Exactly. And this comes to the heartbreaking part. We are proud of what we are doing, one of the trainee maids, Maria, tells me. We are national heroes, which is not true by any stretch of the imagination. They may paint them as heroes, but they are victims of a system that fails them. That was a phrase first coined in a government propaganda campaign, and it's clear that the 20 young women now gathered around me, all immaculately uniformed and polite to a fault, desperately want it to be true. It can't be easy leaving your families behind, I suggest. We have no choice, replies Evelyn, an elfin figure no more than 5 feet tall. I have a baby at home, but no way to support him. The wages I earn in Kuwait will mean my mother can raise him. Many of the other trainees nod in sympathy. Almost all, it seems, are facing the prospect of separation from their children for at least 3 years, because talking about that 3 years, the contract duration for one OFW is 3 years. So they go to the respective employment agencies all across the Philippines, and they sign on to either a 2 or a 3 year contract. Most do it for 3 years. And I've seen in several instances where several of the Filipinas do extend their contracts for another year. And that was very commonplace during the pandemic. Possibly many more. I said it. Their reality will be prolonged servitude in an alien culture. The mood in the academy has darkened. Half the young women before me are now weeping. And you can see right here, this is the academy that they're working out of, which is state run. That is the academy that they are working out of. And it's really sad that that there's a country so rampantly ran with neoliberal economics that this is the reality of a poor country. Alongside the remittances of overseas workers, there's a new phenomenon keeping the Philippine economy afloat. It's known as the BPO industry, or business process outsourcing. You could call it the rise of the call center economy. More and more Western countries have moved their low-cost back office operations to the Philippines. We've overtaken India. Diane Tubbs, a manager at Transcom call centers, boasts as we survey her army of Filipino telephonists handling calls on behalf of a UK parcels delivery company. It's midnight in Manila, 4 p.m. in London, and their phones are red hot as they will be until dawn. British companies love us because our English is not accented. The brightest graduates from our universities fight to get a job here. We only take the smartest kids, and after we finish training them, they even get your British sarcasm, says Tubbs. 1/3 of the Filipino population is under 15 years old. The country may have found a unique niche in the global economy, but current rates of economic growth, though impressive, will not sustain a population projected to double from, and this was in 2015, from 100 to 200 million within 30 years, which is why Jane Judila may just hold the keys to the Philippine economic future. Jane isn't an entrepreneur nor a politician. She's a reproductive health worker who spends her days in some of Manila's most squalid slums, which there are a lot of slums over there. And you could see it right here in this photo right here depicted. That is one of the slums that is across the country. It's makeshift shacks for somebody just to have a home and a roof over their head. This is how bad neoliberalism is running in the global South. Thanks to a law pushed through by the governments last year, she's now permitted to offer the poorest Filipinos free access to condoms, the contraceptive pill, even sterilization for women who want it. The Catholic Church, which commands the loyalty of 90% of Filipinos, fought the initiative tooth and nail, but the clerics lost. Gildilla introduces me to Sherilyn Gonzalez, a whey-faced woman of 30 with 10 children and another on the way. That is the reality in the Philippines. You have major overpopulation problems. Like, there are many people there who have more than 5 or 6 children. There's people that I've even met that's part of a family that had 14 children. I asked Gonzalez whether she's happy. I'll be happy when I've had the baby and I can get sterilized, she said. My eldest has dropped out of school and we can barely afford to educate the others. I tell my children to have 2 kids, then use contraception. If the next generation of Gonzalez's heed her advice, the country's future is promising. If not, tens of millions of young Filipinos may find themselves stuck in a poverty trap, still dependent on overseas labor as a means of escape. And that was an article that I had sent Fadl Kaboob, and he and I have really discussed all of this, like, big time. But this just highlights how bad the neoliberalism runs across the global South. And it's really bad.
Oh, definitely. Oh, I hear you. It's just terrible. And to me, for the church to fight against contraception, they needed contraception to be used years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't care about the people at all.
Well, in the Philippines, they do not have the separation of church and state. They do not. They don't have that like we have enshrined in our Constitution from day one, which is what the U.S. founding fathers wanted. Their country is ran by the Catholic Church.
And nothing is being done to help the families. You know,
Nothing at all.
If the church is saying, oh, they're going to fight against contraception, well, why don't you have something in place as the church to do something so people are living in better conditions.
It seems to me the Philippines owes money to the World Bank or the IMF. Because what you're describing is a country that's beset by neoliberal austerity policies. And it's most probably a country that's kept, in austerity by the World Bank loans or the IMF loans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if they are taking those loans, of course, those loans are in dollars, okay, or in a foreign country, foreign currency, so they cannot pay back those loans.
I'm gonna be talking with Fadl. I'm gonna get Fadl Kaboom if he can, because he's done a lot of stuff about the global or regarding the global South.
I know he has.
Like in Southeast Asian countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, and many others, really aren't being covered by many of the activists who are strongly passionate about the global South. And as of 2008, this is what I just found, that the IMF, and it says right here, the IMF is no longer lending to the Philippines. They have not lended to the Philippines since 2008.
Okay, but the question is, do the Philippines owe money to the IMF?
They could.
Okay, in other words, are they paying back old debts?
They probably are at this point. Because I'm going to have, like, I think Fadl Kaboom mentioned that they were pegged to some currency, but I'm not sure. But
if they're pegged to some currency, it's probably going to be the dollar.
Yeah. But I have another article right here, and it's back to the OFW issue. And this article is from it's a really good article. It's from the Inquirer, which is from the Philippines, and it's about over 700 distressed OFWs were repatriated since January of 2023. And this is from Manila. Over 700 OFWs and their children have been repatriated from Kuwait by the Philippine government since January this year, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs. The DFA said 763 workers and their children, relatives, have so far been repatriated, while 108 who have arrived on 3 flights last August 14th and 15th. Majority of the repatriated workers were undocumented workers staying at the embassy with shelter, said the DFA. They do have shelter accommodations at each embassy. They really do, which is good. And if there's like an overcrowding of them in Kuwait, they send them to the Public Authority of Manpower's deportation shelter, where they'll sit for 1 month or 2 months. It added that OFW's one-way tickets were shouldered by the DFA office and the Undersecretary of Migrant Workers Assistance to Nationals Fund. So they have a yearly budget to tackle all of this, which is a really good thing. They have like a yearly budget where they repatriate every migrant worker. And last I heard that they had a permanent deployment ban on Saudi Arabia because of back pay that the OFWs were not getting.
Oh,
And so Saudi Arabia owes the Philippine government 4.5 billion at the time, if not more now, in remittances to the OO, because there's many cases where workers do not get paid at all for months, if not over a year.
yeah.
They see no pay at all.
Doesn't surprise me. They're probably treated like slaves by the Saudis.
Oh, they are. And there are, I have a friend over there right now who's currently working in Saudi Arabia. She's a Filipina. She gets treated very well by her employers and their family. Like they treat them like their own family.
So it probably depends on the individual family.
Mm-hmm.
Some are
You'll
probably
see.
treated very well, and others are treated like slaves.
You'll see cases and instances where they'll be treated very well. They'll get paid. Like I seen like one of my friends that was a Filipina who was working in Saudi Arabia. And this is a good thing that I've seen. Her employer not only paid for them to go back home after when they had to exit after the contract, but they also give them extra money to live off of for a while and offered for them to come back if they could not find means of employment. And they also helped them with writing out resumes there at the end. Like the families would help them write out a resume to make them look so much better on getting an employment there at home.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to the question of why aren't there jobs at home? I mean, surely there's all kinds of public work to be done in the Philippines.
There is, like, if they had a job guarantee, it would help prevent a lot of these workers from going abroad. And a job guarantee that paid very well.
Yeah, but they probably can't have a job guarantee because they're probably constrained by their creditors to not run deficits. If they can't do deficit spending, it'll be very hard for them to develop.
That's very true. And you just never know what but the situation there is there's just no investment in jobs because, especially in the foreign sector, because there's a constitutional provision that was put into their constitution back in 1987 under Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And in the constitutional provision, it required all of the businesses be 60% Filipino owned.
Okay.
And I was looking into that and talking with Fadil Kaboub. This is like 3-4 years ago. And he says that right there could be why there is a major lack of foreign direct investment coming into the Philippines, because businesses, they want to 100% own the businesses at hand so that way they can reap the benefits. But they're missing out on a lot of tax, like the local government units. They're missing out on a lot of taxes that they can be collecting from foreign ownership of the land, even for homes or vacation properties.
Yes.
And this brings me also into the sad part of tonight's show. And this was something that Dee and I discussed the other night about an overseas Filipino worker that was slain to death in Kuwait. And this article here it's a really great article. I took some time to read over it. It's from Vice News. And it is Justice for Julibi Renara. And this is a really chilling article. She left home to work 5,000 miles away, but was killed and abandoned in a desert. Authorities are moving to investigate a rise in Filipino workers' abuse in Kuwait after the chilling murder of a domestic worker by her employer's 17-year-old son this month. And this was back from February. And this is by a Ko Iwi, which I've never heard of her, but she wrote a really great article on this. Julibi Renara, a Filipino domestic worker living in Kuwait, made a phone call to her family earlier last month, confiding that she was afraid of her employer's 17-year-old son. By the next day, the 35-year-old had seemingly vanished, prompting her friends in the Gulf state to share their concerns about her disappearance on social media. Less than 24 hours later, on January 21st, her remains would be found beside a road in a desert, her skull smashed and her body charred.
Oh, God.
An autopsy revealed that Renara was pregnant, local media reported, with the baby believed to belong to her employer's teenage son, who's also the suspect in her murder, while the 17-year-old, who was not named in reports, was arrested shortly after the discovery of her body. Philippine authorities said on Saturday that they were still confirming reports that he had raped and killed Renara, which is a common occurrence happening to many migrant workers from the Philippines, especially in Kuwait. Renara's death has sent shockwaves through the Philippines, sparking renewed attention on long-standing abuses plaguing Filipino migrant workers in Kuwait, especially those in the domestic work industry known in the region by the outdated and problematic term housemaids. Philippine authorities are now voicing concerns about the rising numbers of such abuses and vowing to enact measures to ensure worker safety. But rights groups point to the long-standing systemic gaps that have failed those trying to seek help while leaving the domestic work industry rife with exploitation. Which they are very, very much exploited. And we just read right there where this is a case of sexual assault. And I'm going to put out trigger warning for those of you in the audience watching this, which is right. There is a trigger warning on this article. It's sexual assault, it's abuse, rape, and all that.
Well, Kuwait, we've said that on the other show, the psychology of the country, the people are raised that they are supreme. So they just have this consciousness that they're supreme to the workers that come over there.
from the kafala system that's in place in many of the Middle Eastern countries, which gives the employer more rights over the workers. There is no workers' rights there for migrant workers. In all cases, in every single migrant worker that goes to places like Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Qatar, and many others, the employers tell the Filipinas to hand over the passports and personal documents over to them under the falsehood of safekeeping, but that is not the case. It is not for safekeeping. It is for extortion. It is for control over the workers, so that way they can hold that passport and personal documentation over their workers' heads to get them to do what they want. And back in 2018, there was a temporary deployment ban, which lasted only a few months, maybe 5 months at the least, that President Rodrigo Duterte lifted. And I was told that he was the laughing stock of Kuwait for caving.
Huh? I'm sorry, he was the laughing stock because of what?
Because he caved and lifted the deployment ban, which at first he vowed it to be permanent. He caved.
I see, he caved to pressure.
Yeah. And this is also something else in this article. The public is not aware of the real gravity of the rampant abuses faced by Filipino domestic helpers in Kuwait. Since 2018, there have been at least 4 cases of murdered Kuwait-based Filipino migrant workers that have made national headlines, including 29-year-old Joanna Demafales, whose body was hid in a freezer in an abandoned apartment for almost 2 years.
Wow.
Her employers, a Syrian and Lebanese couple, were sentenced to death for her murder.
Oh, wow.
Because they were forcefully extradited by back to the Philippines. In 2019, Constancia Lago Dayag was found dead, allegedly beaten to death by her employer. That same year, Janelyn Villavendi died from injuries inflicted by her female employer, who was later sentenced to death for the killing. These are only the high-profile ones.
Sure.
Yeah, there are high-profile ones there that made national attention, but this barely scrapes the surface.
Horrible.
Joanna Concepcion, chairperson of Migrante International, a global alliance for overseas Filipinos, told Vice World News, there are other cases that are not visible. The public is not made aware of the real gravity of the rampant abuses faced by Filipino domestic helpers in Kuwait. This is where what I discussed earlier, coming into this next paragraph. There are around 268,000 Filipinos currently working in Kuwait, many of whom are domestic workers. They are governed by the kafala system, a legal framework used in most Gulf states that accords employers disproportionate power over migrant workers. most notably full control over their legal status. Critics have pointed to the kafala system as a key factor allowing the exploitation of migrant workers in the Middle East, especially amongst domestic workers who depend on their employers for food and shelter. Yeah, they do depend on their employers for food and shelter. I've seen it with my own eyes because I've had many friends who are Filipinos that worked in that region. And some of the areas that they were slept in, they sleep in bunk rooms where there's like 2-3 sets of bunk beds in each room with 6 cabinets across like 2 walls, and it's kind of like a military barracks set up. Bong Concha, the founder of Kaagape Ako Ing Bawat OFW, a group assisting Filipino migrant workers in the Middle East, told Vice World News that the majority of the thousands of requests for help they receive daily come from domestic workers. Most come to them with complaints of employment contract violations. See here?
Yeah.
Are overworked and underfed and suffer from physical and emotional abuse, he said.
That's terrible. So terrible.
Oh yeah. There is also, I will note, they do not get paid any overtime pay if they work over their required hours. It's stated in the contract. I have on an old laptop of mine, I have a master contract from an employment agency there. I acquired it. I have the master contract that states everything that needs to be stated.
That's not right. That's not right that the contract should have something that they do get paid for working,
There is,
overtime.
that's
It's
why they
terrible
have
that
that superiority over the workers. And these workers are very exploited. And like, I believe it was you and Joe earlier in the program that said that they are treated as slaves. A lot of employers are treating the migrant workers as their slaves, Concha said, adding that living with employers differentiates domestic workers from other migrant workers. They are the ones dealing personally with the employers. They're the ones staying physically with their employers for the 24 months of their contract, which was shortened during the pandemic from 36 months to 24 months. On Tuesday, in response to Renara's death, the Philippine government suspended the accreditation of foreign recruitment agencies in Kuwait. A similar measure was taken place in 2018 when Philippine authorities imposed a months-long ban on sending Filipino domestic workers to Kuwait after Demophalis' mutilated body was found in the freezer.
Phew.
The labor ban, which was met with criticism from the Kuwait government, became the center of a diplomatic crisis as then Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte railed against abusive practices in the Gulf country. There was literally about to become a war between Kuwait and the Philippines, a diplomatic crisis war.
Wow.
The Filipino is no slave to anyone, anywhere and everywhere. Every unlawful physical injury that is inflicted on OFWs is an injury I personally bear as the head of this republic, Duterte said at a news conference in February of 2018. The diplomatic row then ended with the two countries signing a labor agreement that granted greater protection to Filipino migrant workers in Kuwait, but reports of abuses among Filipino domestic workers have continued to capture public attention in the Philippines. In June last year, 5 Filipino domestic workers appeared on local media asking for help after they were locked up in a small room in Kuwait by their employment agency. There's some crooked employment agencies there as well. Very crooked employment agencies, which are the recruitment agencies. They even exploit these workers as well, which, in my experience, from what I've seen, many of these employment agencies are Filipinas who do co-opt to their side. But there are so many more abuses that go unpublicized. Lucy, a 31-year-old domestic worker from Mindanao in the southern Philippines. Oh my God, Mindanao, that's where my girlfriend's from. Who requested a pseudonym out of fear of reprisal from her employers, told Vice World News about her 2-year stint working at a household in Kuwait where she earned just 120 dinars or $393 a month. She described a hostile work environment and felt she was walking on eggshells every day. Once she refused to surrender her mobile phone to her employer, the middle-aged housewife slapped her on the shoulder with a slipper. They think that we are the ones using our phone, she said. Every day they got angry with us, which is very true. The employers will confiscate their mobile phones, which, as stated in the contract agreement, the employer is supposed to grant them access to a mobile phone along with wireless internet connectivity so they can talk back to their families back home. It's a requirement, and I have it on an old laptop over there in the corner.
Yeah, but what are the penalties for violating the requirement?
Well, what they do is they'll run away to the embassy, and I'm in a Facebook group right now where I advise them, do not file a case in Kuwait, because the Kuwait government will, in a way, they don't have home court advantage, is what I'm saying here. The case will get manipulated to work against the workers in favor of the employers. That's how the kafala system works. And during the repatriation process, they have to get temporary passports and such to return back home to the Philippines because the employer refuses to give up the personal belongings along with their passport and their personal documentation, which, mind you, under international law, that passport does not belong to the employer. Even if you and I got a passport, it would not belong to either of us. We may pay to get it, but it is property of our country's government. That passport, if I went and applied for a passport and got one today, and it come in the mail in a few months, that passport belongs to the U.S. government.
Yes.
And it's crazy. Her employer later ghosted her after her contract ended around 2019, leaving her with 3 months of unpaid salary as she struggled to reach them from her hometown in the Philippines. While she remains troubled from the experience, she has since returned to Kuwait to work in a new household after being persuaded by her friend to return to the job, which is a mistake to begin with. Just because your friend says something, it's like telling somebody, oh, jump off a bridge, and then you already do it. Renara's death has drawn responses from the Kuwaiti authorities, with Musaad Saleh Athwat's Kuwait ambassador to Manila stating that the Kuwaiti society was shocked and saddened by the news. Our justice system will not lose sight ensuring justice for Miss Renara, he wrote in a letter, adding that her murder was an isolated case. These murders are not an isolated case. This is actually more common, but their ambassador to the Philippines is lying. But Susan Opal, the secretary of the Philippine Department of Migrant Workers, pointed to a rising trend of Filipino workers in Kuwait. She said on Saturday that they were sending officials to Kuwait to investigate the increase and to discuss preventative measures. The Migrant Workers Department has suspended operations of Renara's recruitment agency, which they may have suspended operations, but the recruitment agencies are so damn corrupt that they will go and change their name to something else and then be back in business a few days later.
Mm.
While senior officials from the department met with other recruitment agencies on Monday to discuss the welfare of Filipino workers. And as you can see here, there's a Facebook post right here from the Department of Migrant Workers as well. And this is a really good post right here from January, where Secretary Susan Opal condoles with Renara's family. It's a beautiful place there, but it's still just crazy. Since Renara's remains were flown back to Manila on Friday night, her wake has been attended by political figures around the country, including senators and President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. But even as the country's leaders descend upon Renara's hometown to offer their condolences, migrant workers' rights advocates point to the piecemeal efforts at safeguarding Filipino workers' rights and a willful ignorance of these workers' plight abroad. Concha said that over the years, his team forwarded numerous requests for assistance from overseas Filipino workers to the Philippine authorities, but has largely been met with silence. Meanwhile, Concepcion of Migrante International points to systemic flaws that led to the weak enforcement of workers' rights agreed in the 2018 bilateral agreement, as well as the lack of an effective mechanism for domestic workers to report safety concerns. And I have said it and I will say it again. They need to develop an app for smartphones for the migrant workers. The Philippine government needs to develop an app that they must download to their phones before leaving the Philippines to report abuses and call authorities. Maybe something will get done quicker.
That would be a good move, but I really think that the solution to this whole problem is to have a tight employment market right there, okay, in the Philippines,
A very good, like a job guarantee.
like a federal job guarantee at a living wage that's socially inclusive. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they have to have that. But the question is whether they really are, okay, a monetary sovereign. Okay, if they owe money in currencies that are not their own, well, then they're not a monetary sovereign because that's one
Then
of the
they are what they call a
criteria.
currency user rather than a currency issuer.
They're a currency user with respect to paying the loans back.
Yes.
They cannot issue currency to pay the loans back. And I'm afraid that's the situation there.
We believe that Jollibee could have been saved if the Philippine government was proactive in responding to cases of distressed migrant workers, particularly domestic helpers who make up the bulk of reported cases of abuse, she said. And we know that the Philippine embassy in Kuwait and Philippine government officials know about the real situation. As Philippine authorities considered how to respond to the mounting reports of abuses suffered by their citizens in a faraway place, thousands of domestic workers in Kuwait, like Lucy, remains helpless against abusive practices from their employer. While Lucy is thankful that her current employer treats her well, she is keenly aware of the disturbing pattern of abuse that could one day surface for disenfranchised workers like her. But today, her only strategy is to stay positive and pray for the best. I feel sad because the journey here in Kuwait is not good. Sometimes here in Kuwait, we run into no good employer, she said. I trust in our God and I'm thinking good until I finish my contract.
So there are human rights violations that are rampant there.
Major human rights violations which are run rampant in the Kuwait. And
It's a terrible situation to be in. You know, being raised in Philippines and just the situation in the Philippines and having to go overseas to work. I mean, it's just a horrible situation to be in.
But do you happen to know if the elections in the Philippines are legitimate? Or
they do not have any electronic voting machines. They have paper ballots. But Marcos won by like a large margin in the last election, just like Duterte did in the 2016 elections. And their next presidential election will be in 2028, I believe.
okay, is the term for a president there 6 years?
Yes, they have each president. The presidential term in the Philippines is only 6 years. That's all they get. They passed that post 1987 after Ferdinand Marcos Sr., which is Bong Bong's father, was in office for more than 2 decades.
Yes, I know. The 6 year term is also something Mexico has.
Mm-hmm.
There's one 6 year term there. And then it can't be extended. It has worked well, okay, in Mexico, I think.
Well, the reason why they did that in the Philippines was to keep and pretty much to prevent and safeguard themselves from having another Ferdinand Marcos scenario where they have a leader who will not leave office. So that's why they enacted term limits after the fall of Ferdinand Marcos.
Sure.
Which he was president, I think, from 1965 to 1987. And I believe that's around that same time frame when they enacted that constitutional provision, which prevented much of the foreign direct investment, which is needed for healthy economic growth and economic stimulation.
I don't understand why the foreign investment is needed if they're really a monetary sovereign.
Yeah.
In other words, they must not be a monetary sovereign. There must be financial constraints that are imposed on them by the lenders. And they probably have to run a balanced budget or something close to that.
And a lot of people like to call the migrant workers of the Philippines modern day heroes, but
they're modern day slaves.
They're modern day victims of a system that threw them over the bridge years ago.
Yeah.
Like, this is nothing more than neoliberal austerity at its best.
Yes. But we have to know where the neoliberal austerity comes from. Most probably it comes from those loans. So this is significant because the Philippines would then be able to get free, okay, if they become a part of the Eastern Bloc that's now forming.
They
can get low interest loans through the BRICS.
Yeah, but they've expressed that they would like to remain neutral. Like this, like with the formation of BRICS, they expressed that they are not interested, that they would much rather be a neutral country between the U.S. and BRICS and not get involved in that.
Yeah, right, but you can't be a neutral country if you're under the rule, of the dollar. In other words, if the dollar is controlling your development, then there's no such thing as a neutral country.
Mm-hmm. And the Philippines depends heavily on foreign remittances from the overseas labor market. And that's what makes up a large amount of their nation's GDP. I think the last statement they put out, I think it put like, I don't remember what percentage of the nation's GDP was made up by foreign remittances. And I saw an article, I don't remember where it was at, but I'm going to have to locate it and do another show on this as well, that they do not view they view OFWs as a means of money rather than actually reform the system to work in favor of everyday ordinary Filipino citizens.
We have a serious echo in our system.
I think it was D, because I think she was on YouTube watching as well.
I see. Okay, yeah, it's gone now.
But yeah, they seriously, they see the migrant workers as a means of money and all that, but yet they don't want to reform the system to prevent many people from going abroad looking for work, when the system, when these same people, they need to be home fighting back and join political activist movements.
Yes.
And dump the corruption at home.
Yes,
They need
absolutely.
the corruption more than we think.
And probably more than they think, too.
Yeah, if
Okay, and by electing another Marcos, I don't think they were dumping the corruption.
it's just like here in the U.S. where we elected two Bushes, almost elected a third one. It's all about and one of the major systemic problems there in the Philippines is they have family dynasties that rule that country. Like the Dutertes have now become a new political dynasty where his daughter is the vice president over there. You've got the Dutertes, the Aquinos, uh, and the Marcoses. You've got multiple family dynasties that control the whole monopoly.
Wonderful.
And they do not, they, I don't think that, I think if they wanted to, they could easily reform their economy to work for everybody instead of just those at the top. So that way the rich are not getting richer, the poor are not getting poorer. It's going to take a major revolution in countries like the Philippines, which is they may have a rapid growing economy in the ASEAN countries, but the people still remain poor. Like, how can you claim to have a really good growing economy when you still have overwhelming amounts of poverty that's running rampant? You just cannot.
When you have a neoliberal economy that's going, uh, that's growing fast, okay, it's delivering the benefits of growth to the rich
At the expense of the poor.
at the expense of the poor, of course. Yeah, that's what was created by the Washington Consensus in the 1980s.
Like the major, like in that one article that was from the BBC, the BPO, which is the call center industry, that plays a vital role amongst younger Filipinos that are just coming out of universities and working at call centers. And the like even in agricultural commodities, they are a major exporter of sugar and rice because that's two of the main agricultural commodities. They also uh, export a lot of rambutan, coconuts, and such. Which rambutan ang masarap na ya
What's that?
means it's really delicious.
Yeah, I know it is. Yeah, the rambutan. I used to eat that in Thailand.
Yep.
Yeah, I was there for a brief time in 1969. That's a long time.
Yeah. Whenever I do go to the Philippines, I'm going to be witnessing it all firsthand. And that's one of my plans is to go and visit the Philippines and witness everything firsthand and bring topics to around the world with Dee and friends. So that way we can discuss the happenings there, just like Madeline does in Colombia.
Colombia, yeah, that's cool.
Then we really will be around the world with Dee and friends.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we will. That'd be great.
Now we just need somebody in Africa on our team. So that way we can cover issues going on in Niger and other countries.
Yeah, it's a lot happening over there.
Yeah, especially with what France is trying to do.
Standing up to France, standing up to the West.
And here recently, I saw where Niger expressed interest of joining BRICS.
Yes, I'm sure they did.
That would be a major FU to the West if they joined BRICS. And that would mean that if they did join BRICS, they would no longer be exploited by the West.
They have to get invited to join BRICS, though. So that's the question.
Will they get invited, and will they accept the invitation? Is the two key questions.
Yes.
Mhm.
They'll probably accept the invitation in that country.
Yeah, especially they would be crazy not to.
Yeah, they're pretty pissed off at the French. And
Yeah, that would be like
I think they're pretty pissed off at us too.
But
Definitely.
anywho, thank you, Joe, for popping in, and thank you, D, for popping in. Go and subscribe to my friend D here with Around the World with D and Friends, and my friend Joe Firestone with Joe Firestone Empowering Democracy, where he does a lot of really great shows on. He's doing a really good series on what a Russian victory will look like in Ukraine. And my friend D over here is doing really great work with issues around Palestinian rights and something similar to what I did tonight, which was an Around the World style show, which I am going to be looking into more of these shows to cover and be doing them in future episodes.
That would be great.
Don't forget to go over to Around the World with D and Friends, subscribe and like their Facebook page. Go and subscribe to Joe over at Joe Firestone Empowering Democracy, and donate to donate to his Patreon, and buy D a coffee here and there, and buy Joe a coffee. They have their links there. And thank you all thank you too for joining me tonight, and thank you all in the audience for showing up. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and join the Facebook group, and let's have some good discussions over there.
Okay, and thank you, Greg, for informing us about the Philippines.
Oh, you're most certainly welcome.
Yes, thank you, Greg.
And we got another group, which is created by the three of us, which we are forming a movement called Dumping the Corruption. Join that group as well.
Yeah, that's going to be a terrific group.
Oh, yes.
Everything leads back to dumping the corruption, even tonight. Your show boils down to dumping corruption.
Every aspect of our lives is going to center dumping the corruption in one way or another, whether we know it or not. If you want Medicare for all, dump the corruption. If you want the Green New Deal, dump the corruption, and so forth. Dump the corruption.
Yeah, and it's really comprehensive when you dump the corruption, because you're going to clean out.
You get Medicare for all. You dump the corruption, you get the Green New Deal. You dump the corruption, you get student loan debt forgiveness.
Yes, and the reason why is because if everybody dumps the corruption, there will be a whole new House, of Representatives in 2025, and there will be a Senate, 1/3 of which is going to be entirely new. In 2025. That's going to break the filibuster.
Oh, yeah. We need to elect some third parties in there.
We certainly do. And if we dump the corruption, of course, the third parties are going to have a much better chance, because the third parties are not taking the big money.
And good news. I've been talking with somebody who's running as a Green, who's a fellow Red Beret. I'm going to be scheduling an interview with our fellow Red Beret who is running in Washington State.
Jason Call?
Yep, he's going to come on the show with just me and him, and it's going to be the very first part of the candidate interviews for our movement.
Good. Good.
But anyways, Have a great night, Joe. Have a great night, Dee, and everybody else. And take it easy.
Okay, and you have a great night too, Greg.
You too.
Okay,
Good
bye.
night.